Welcome back to The World Today here on France 24. I'm Stuart Norval. The headlines for you. France's Prime Minister François Bayrou set to head to the Élysée Palace, we think around midday Paris time, to formally hand in his resignation to President Emmanuel Macron. That after his huge defeat in a confidence motion yesterday. Now Macron faced with the task of trying to find France's fifth Prime Minister of Macron's second term in office. We're going to analyse that for you in the next 15 minutes. I'm going to talk to our political expert, Andrew Smith, as part of Perspective in just a moment. So it could be someone from his inner circle, a current minister perhaps. It could be someone aligned more to the left to try to persuade left-leaning lawmakers to give their support. Or it could even be that Macron tries his hand at a cohabitation where he would work directly with a prime minister from an opposing party. Whichever route he goes down, though, the French Prime Minister desperately needs to be someone who will stick and not just face the same fate as François Bayrou and Michel Barnier before him. Macron set to make the decision in the coming days. After, of course, Bayrou lost that confidence vote yesterday. Well, let's start off with some reaction for you.
If he loves this country, if he cares about the interests of the French, if he doesn't want to leave the far right as the only alternative, then, as I said, he should come and find us.
This moment marks the end of the agony of a phantom government. The president has only one option: call new elections and let the country choose.
Well, joining me now is historian of modern France at Queen Mary University of London, Andrew Smith. Good to have you with us, as ever, Andrew, here on France 24. I mean, once again, France is in a bit of a mess, isn't it? I mean, is that fair?
I think it's very much fair. This is a real crisis, I think, and a crisis of the Fifth Republic. We haven't seen this level of instability in the Fifth Republic. Gone are the days where we saw, a real element of stability, an idea machine for creating these majorities behind a strong president. This looks very much like the France of the Fourth Republic or even the Third Republic. And I think that's the big worry. Famously, of course, François Bayrou spoke about Pierre Mendès France, this idea of a Fourth Republic prime minister, a kind of short term, but one that fixed a lot of problems and all the rest of it. Maurice Larkin, the historian, famously called Pierre Mendès France Janus-like. But he also referred to the idea of his Cassandra-like qualities. And I think that's probably what we'll remember François Bayrou for, this Cassandra-like warning of over-indebtedness, of danger to come, of all these difficulties, but nonetheless he met the same fate. He's outlived Pierre Mendès France by about 30 days in office, but nonetheless also fallen to a confidence vote. So in reality, what we I think keep seeing are these echoes of republics past, an idea that really there needs to be something different to reflect this new changed reality. A France divided roughly into thirds, which are mutually exclusive and find it very difficult to work with each other. In a sense, yesterday, Bayrou's, I mentioned he was Cassandra-like there. His fall was like some sort of Greek tragedy. We watched him take the stage. We watched him make this desperate plea only to be sort of denounced by all of his political rivals before finally meekly accepting the fact that his time was over. And so it really is a bit tragic. But actually, the worst thing about it is it seems like that tragedy is going to repeat itself again.
Yeah, Andrew, we're going to have a little bit of a listen now to some of the reaction this morning from some of the politicians talking on French television and radio. First of all, this is the socialist leader, Olivier Faure.
I believe we need to see clearly that we are in a divided country that is fed up. It's time for a divided government. Today, we want change. We want to ensure that French people who will be protesting in the streets, expressing their exasperation, can finally find a political outlet through change that, in my opinion, cannot be a continuation of what we've known for 8 years.
Olivier Faure there, who's hoping he might be named the next Prime Minister to try and bring the left on board. We can also hear as well, Andrew, from Jordan Bardella from the National Rally.
The question is, are we moving away from Macronism or not? Since 2017, Emmanuel Macron has been saying, you don't change a losing team. Today, if a new government wants to have a chance of achieving concrete measures for the country and a return to stability, it must finally break with Macronism. Who's in charge is irrelevant. It's the underlying policy that must change.
No, that's Jordan Bardella there from the National Rally. I mean, listening to both of them, Andrew, it's obvious, isn't it, that all the different parties have different solutions to this now, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the solutions involve them getting a shot is really what we could diagnose from that. I think that's one of the big problems. In a sense, when you've got this kind of tripartite division, when you've got this idea of a country where people disagree politically, in one sense, in the Fifth Republic, you have the perfect machine to solve that, a parliamentary democracy. You have people that should be able to work together. And I think that's one of the big difficulties you've seen there with the far right, of course, are very, very keen for this idea of another dissolution of the government, a return to legislative elections. But I think one of the things that's really key here is that it's not really down again to the French people to solve the problems of Parliament. I think one of the things that we need to keep coming back to is it's down to Parliament to solve the problems of the French people. And one of the big difficulties right now is the inability of parliamentarians to work beyond their kind of narrow party boundaries, the narrow party interests. And that really is the big difficulty. And it's also what makes it so impossible to see how we actually find a route out of this. You mentioned different candidates. Of course, we know that Emmanuel Macron has traditionally tried to govern really from the centre right. You could look at even Bayrou and backwards. We've got this idea of, we've seen how that works. We've seen the idea of trying to govern with his centrist majority and taking a little bit of the Republicans on the centre right with him. We've reached a situation where that's no longer going to work. Why? Really because the far right have essentially removed their sort of soft guarantee, as it were, and are much more on a war footing because of the increasing pace with which we reach new parliamentary tests, the municipal elections in March next year, of course, followed by the presidential elections in 2027. Now, this is quite important, I think, because what it means is that route on the right is essentially blocked in many ways. And you can see Marine Le Pen there in her furry jacket, a wolf in sheep's clothing, trying to call for this new dissolution. But actually, the only reason for that is because of the surging anger in the country. And so the National Rally feel they can capitalise on that anger in order to seize the prime ministerial seat. So there's something, the one thing he hasn't tried before, and this is the big imponderable, is looking to the left. And of course, you mentioned Olivier Faure. You mentioned the idea that he's interested in terms of the Socialist Party leading. They've got a big problem as well, because the Socialist Party want to lead, but they cannot be seen to be stooges to a brand of Macronism, which is kind of so unpopular now that you couldn't win a vote for it. And essentially, on the left, they have to be seen in the Socialist Party to go in. If they want to be prime ministerial candidates, they want to try and construct a government, they need to try and govern with a left-wing agenda. Why? Because otherwise, France Insoumise, the France Unbowed, the far left, Mélenchon's party, will eat them alive at the next electoral test. And so this is the big challenge. Soft right and soft left are terrified of the margins. And meanwhile, the centre has crumbled to the extent that it's not really possible to find that same amount of governance there. And that leaves us with this same imponderable, how to govern this ungovernable parliament.
Andrew, there's something else on the horizon, isn't there? Not only have we got to have a new Prime Minister named, we've also got this huge day of action, which is planned tomorrow here in France. I mean, tell us about that and how that could affect this process.
Yeah, of course, we've got the Bloc Everything, Bloc Continu movement scheduled for the 10th of September. It was something which emerged through sort of shadowy sort of online channels, Telegram networks and all kinds of things. You saw it initially, it was, conspiratorial circles and all the rest. And it spread much broader and gained much more traction across Facebook and TikTok, and actually then spread into, I guess, more mainstream political opinion as well. It looked at first a little bit like the Yellow Vests, a sort of completely apolitical movement, one which set out to communicate like broad popular anger with purchasing power, with political immobility, with these types of issues. One of the things that's happened, which has changed it slightly, is the far left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party, France Unbowed, have jumped on it in a really strong way, and they've been very, very keen to support it and essentially to take ownership of it. And that's transformed it slightly, such that it seems to be taking on more of a far left character. Now, at first, because of that kind of unusual origin, we had a lot of people in the trade unions, for example, people who would support that normal mobilisation in the street and those types of May Day protests and that type of thing. were a little bit cautious because they weren't sure what the demands were and who was looking to support it. We've seen some unions get on board. Of course, there's a big inter-syndical kind of cross-union protest on the 18th that's scheduled. But really, I think what we're likely to see are people trying to, first of all, kind of maybe blockade roundabouts, blockade shops. We've seen the idea of people staying home, not spending. We've also seen on the government side, the Interior Minister, Bruno Retailleau, warning people that they will not tolerate the idea of blockading or stopping critical national infrastructure, like the blockading of refineries way back in the day in the 2000s. So there really is something. It's unsure how many people will turn out. It's been a big splash, but because of that, we know online manipulation is very possible. So it's quite an uncertain thing. It's not got one agenda. It's not got one leader, and so we've got an amorphous, big expression of public anger. We've got a date, we've got a time, but we don't yet have an agenda to see what's going to happen on the 10th.
Andrew, I've got one more question for you. But first of all, let's just bring you one report in the meantime, because the collapse of the government, of course, means that many legislative projects that were underway will now grind to a halt. In addition to the big question of how to balance the budget, the items now on hold are numerous. Monty Francis has more.
From the energy industry to public broadcasting to legislation on euthanasia and criminal justice, the collapse of the government means delay or worse for a slew of bills that were under consideration by French lawmakers. Already passed by the Senate in July, a bill laying out the country's energy policy through 2030 is now in limbo. The bill allocated how much of France's energy would come from nuclear and renewable sources, and was seen as part of the country's goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Also on hold, a controversial proposed reform of public broadcasting being pushed by Culture Minister Rachida Dati. The bill was due to return to the Assembly this fall, and many expected it would pass, creating a holding company to oversee and possibly make cuts to Radio France, France Télévisions, and the National Audiovisual Institute. The bill could now be postponed indefinitely. Already delayed once by the government's collapse in June of last year, this May the National Assembly adopted a bill allowing terminally ill patients to end their lives, and a second bill that expands palliative care. But with the government's collapse, it's unclear when a final vote on either of the bills could happen. Criminal justice reform championed by the Justice Minister is also now on the back burner. The proposed reforms included changes to sentencing guidelines intended to give judges more leeway in handing out punishments. Economic reforms in France have also been tabled, including a bill to fight social security and tax fraud, which the former prime minister had hoped would save more than €2 billion in next year's budget. The government's collapse is also reverberating on the other side of the globe in the French overseas semi-autonomous territory of New Caledonia, which was granted a new status just 2 months ago, enabling citizens to have dual nationality with France. There's been political upheaval over when to hold local elections, and the government collapse on the mainland could complicate discussions there and ultimately delay those contests.
So all that on hold, a fifth Prime Minister to be named in just over 2.5 years. Andrew, you just got 1 minute to answer this last question. Amid all of this, is there a risk to Emmanuel Macron himself?
I think in Emmanuel Macron's first term, he was the hyper-president. Essentially, he was his own prime minister. He used people as a shield, but nonetheless, he was the one responsible for these legislative things, these legislative campaigns, these energy and these ideas. But in his second term, he's pulled back since 2022. We've seen this idea of much more reliance on the prime minister. And actually what that's done is, while he's been busy attending to a lot of foreign affairs, we've seen him very active internationally, he's left that domestic scene wide open. And I think that does leave him under threat, because right now, you've seen it referred to in the Italian newspapers earlier on, he seems like a lame duck president, a zombie president. What's going to happen? Governments need to govern. They're not there simply to mind the till. There needs to be movement in France, and this is where it calls for real invention. So Emmanuel Macron will need to appoint a prime minister in the next couple of days, and needs to be imaginative, reach out beyond the boundaries that he's already explored, and find new solutions to what are essentially new problems for his second term.
Great to have you with us as ever. Thanks very much once again, Andrew. Andrew Smith, the historian of modern France at Queen Mary University, joining us there from London.